Thank you, my friends, for joining me once again on the Morning Mindset. Carrie here. I am just excited about what we're talking about in these most recent episodes. And after yesterday's episode, you may not feel real excited because we talked about the reality that we all experience, which is that we continue to sin even after we've come to faith in Jesus Christ. I mean, let's just say it. Let's admit it. It happens. It is part of what it means to be growing as a believer in Jesus Christ. I mean, think about how a child grows. They don't come out of the womb knowing how to talk, knowing how to walk, having the intellectual capacity and ability of an adult. They go through a process of growth. And I think that's a great concept for us to focus on today, because you are in a process of growth, aren't you? You're always growing in your understanding of the truth of God and in your knowledge of how to apply that truth to your life. And you see, that's part of the explanation behind why we continue to sin, even after the Spirit of God has come into our lives. And we're focusing on Romans chapter 8, and I want to read to you again verses 9 and 10, because those verses are what tells us that the Spirit of God lives in us. It says, "You, however, are not in the flesh, but in the Spirit, if in fact the Spirit of God dwells in you. Anyone who does not have the Spirit of Christ does not belong to him." You see, that's what we've been talking about. Paul's trying to get us to think rightly about ourselves. He says, if the Spirit of God dwells in you, if you have placed your faith in Jesus Christ. It does. That's the truth. And that's the truth we need to accept, no matter what we feel because of an ongoing pattern or struggle with sin. You see, and believing that truth and focusing on that truth will actually help us in overcoming that sin that seems to be the thing holding us back right now. It's kind of this vicious circle. When we sin, we feel unworthy and we begin to doubt that we really do have the Spirit of God in us. But the reality is, if we would just believe what God says, that the Spirit of God is in us, that belief would give us the confidence to take on that pattern of sin in a more aggressive and stronger way. You see, God's truth is truth. And if God says the Spirit of God lives in us, that He's given His Spirit to us, who are we to question Him? You see, our feelings of doubt come up, and they try to convince us, just like the serpent tried to convince Eve in the garden, that God was not on her side, that He was not really for her, that He was holding something back. You see, He tries to convince us that can't be true, that the Spirit of God lives in you. Because look at the evidence. You continue to sin. Wouldn't you stop sinning as much if the Spirit of God really lived in you? And you hear in my tone, I'm trying to be convincing of what the conniving emotion and voice of our enemy says to us. You see, that's how he comes to us, doesn't he? You've experienced that. I know you have. But when we focus on what God has said, we are able to stand on that truth and say, no, that is not true. The Spirit of God does dwell in me, and I am just in a process of growth. Let's look at verse 10. It says, if Christ is in you, although the body is dead because of sin, the Spirit is life because of righteousness. Now, do you understand what he's saying there? If Christ is in you, which He is if you've placed your faith in Jesus Christ, here's the truth you need to focus on. You are going to continue to experience some aspects of death that comes from sin, because that sin is a residue attached to your mortal body right now. Notice he says, although the body is dead because of sin. You see, that body's going to die. It's going to wind up in the grave, and it's because it's still tainted by sin. And it's that power of sin that infects your being to a point still. It's what you're struggling with. But he's saying the Spirit of God is in you, and He is life because of righteousness. You see, the Spirit of God is infused with righteousness, and He dwells in you. It's that Spirit of God who will empower and help you to overcome. My brothers and sisters, let's think about that. Let's push away the emotion and doubt. And remember today, the Spirit of God dwells in us.